Chosen one, the door closed quietly, and that silence has been replaying in their mind on a loop. You did not just walk away. You orchestrated a psychological trap so smooth. Nobody knew what was happening. While manipulation attempts were happening, you were 2 steps ahead, setting the entire stage for your exit. Control was assumed, but you were silently collecting emotional data, observing patterns and making mental notes while smiling in faces. Every lie told, every shift in energy, every fake apology. You saw it all and said nothing. That was part of the brilliance. Type, "I see it" in the comments, not as agreement with this video, as documentation. The patterns were visible to you. The data was being collected. The archive was building. Let that be your timestamp, the moment you confirmed your own intelligence. Relaxation was needed for hands to be shown. You did not call it out. You let it build. This was not an emotional decision. You were not just tired. You were focused. You were calm, even while hurting, because your mind had already started drafting your blueprint for freedom. Access was assumed to still exist. Texts kept getting answered. You showed up when you had to. You played your role just enough to keep suspicion off your trail. That is what made it powerful. The realization that you were done never came. You moved like investment still existed, but spiritually you were already gone. You planned your exit like it was a mission. Boundaries got set that went unnoticed. Your next moves got secured in silence. You did not slam the door. You left it slightly open because you knew the truth would eventually seep out on its own. That is what made your exit poetic. You created space for full dysfunction to reveal itself while you documented the breakdown and moved like a ghost preparing to vanish. When it finally happened, shock was the response. No loud goodbye, no begging, just a clean cut. By the time realization hit that you were gone, you had already outgrown the entire situation. Your mind had leveled up. Your emotions had caught up. Your spirit had already stepped into a new season. What remains misunderstood is this. Your exit was not just a moment. It was a masterpiece. And the reason shock still exists is because it never got seen coming. You did not just walk out. You watched, waited, and executed. That was not an escape. That was power in motion, and it was flawless. Your exit was not escape. It was execution of a strategic revelation. You knew exactly what would happen once you walked away. Lies would get told. Things would get spun. Victim cards would get played. You would look unstable, ungrateful, or bitter. So instead of storming out, you planned your exit like a slow, calculated reveal. You did not need to destroy anyone. You just needed to leave in such a clear, intentional way that when people eventually looked back, the reason would be obvious without you ever having to explain it. You understood the truth had more impact when it unfolded by itself. So you stopped over-explaining. You stopped reacting to chaos. You became quieter, more observant. You began letting behavior speak while you preserved your energy. You allowed dysfunction to keep bubbling until it could not be hidden anymore. And you did not rush it. You let time work for you. That is what made it so effective. You were not in a hurry to run. It was a silent build-up to something undeniable. You were setting the scene for truth to have the loudest voice. Exposure did not come from you. Self-exposure happened naturally. You just gave room for it. And while underestimation continued, you were already halfway out the door with your dignity, your receipts, and your sense of direction intact. People who were once fooled by charm started asking questions. People who used to doubt your version of events started seeing what you saw. And that is what you really wanted, not to win arguments, but to leave in such a solid, intentional way that facts started revealing themselves after you left. Masks did not get destroyed by you. You just walked away and let masks slip without lifting a finger. What shook the situation was not just that you were gone. It was that you did not need to scream, fight, or beg. Your absence did what your presence could not. It told the truth louder than any confrontation ever could, and that is why haunting still happens, because deep down understanding exists. You did not just leave, you delivered the final proof. You knew watching would happen. So, you turned your departure into a broadcast. Every move you made was intentional. You were not just leaving, you were documenting your way out without saying a word. The thought still existed that control remained. That puppet master status continued while you carefully took back every piece of yourself. You made your growth public enough to be felt but private enough that the full plan never got seen. That is what made it hit so hard. You did not run away. You evolved out loud. You dropped clues through your energy, your boundaries, your silence. You did not have to argue or explain yourself. Your actions told the whole story and people were paying attention. Confusion about you started clearing up for people just from how you carried yourself. That was not luck. That was precision. While control of narrative was assumed, you were creating a whole new one. You made sure people could connect dots without you ever having to spell anything out. But the shift in your glow, your peace, your level up, it started making people ask questions. And every time attempts were made to speak on you, bitterness sounded louder. Instability became more obvious. Exposure increased. The beauty of your exit was how unbothered it looked. Press like right now. Not for the algorithm, as a signal that this message activated something true in you. Every person who signals here is another chosen one who operated at this level. Let your like be the quiet confirmation you have been withholding from everyone else. But underneath that, calm was someone who had been through enough chaos to know better than to match that energy. Watching was wanted by you, because the more watching happened, the more obvious it became where problems truly lived. Spiraling was expected. Crying returns were anticipated. Begging was predicted. Instead, you moved like someone who knew worth and had already outgrown the mess. That is what makes it burn. You turned your exit into a silent broadcast, a living testimony. Daily tuning in happened, trying to find signs of weakness. And all that got witnessed was strength. You did not just walk away. You let observation happen of what true power looks like when it does not need to prove anything. And now unseeing cannot happen. If this message activated your knowing, type "I am already gone" in the comments. Not because the physical exit already happened, because mental and spiritual departure always preceded the physical, and naming it here is how you timestamp your own intelligence. Victory was still assumed. Belief existed that you were exactly where you were wanted. Confused, weak, dependent, silent. But you were not frozen. You were focused. You were not lost. You were loading. Control was assumed because you understood something profound. Emotional impulsiveness gives power away. Strategic stillness reclaims it. You smiled through betrayal, not because you did not feel it, but because you did not want to waste a single move reacting to a game you had already decided to exit. Every insult, every manipulation, every attempt to push your buttons, you clocked it all. But you played it cool. You knew the emotional explosion being hoped for would only give ammunition for stories to get spun, so you gave nothing to twist. You were silent, but you were not idle. You were collecting. Every conversation, every pattern, every double standard became part of the internal archive you were building. While assumptions were made about getting away with things, you were getting smarter, stronger, and clearer. And the more belief existed in your continued spell status, the more revelation happened about true nature. Louder moments came. Nastier patterns emerged. Sloppier behavior showed. You did not rush. You let full self-exposure happen. You knew the final move had to be surgical. No mess, no drama. Just exit with receipts and a rebuilt sense of self. By the time you walked away, you were not even the same person anymore. You had mastered the art of outgrowing chaos without alerting it. You had transformed your pain into precision. The illusion was left that control existed until the very end. And when you finally cut things off, that is what broke the situation. Shock did not just come from you leaving, haunting came from how you did it. Because truth exists. You were never seen coming. Belief persisted that you were wrapped up in drama. Meanwhile, you were sealing fate with every quiet step you took toward your freedom. And now confusion exists about how a game got lost that seemed won. You got figured out, or so the thinking went. You got figured out, or so the thinking went. A whole profile got created in someone's mind of who you were. Too emotional, too soft, too loyal, too afraid to be alone, too invested to walk away. Every assumption made about your limitations became a tool you used for liberation. Because while underestimation happened, you were surpassing every boundary placed on your potential. Naivety was assumed when you were actually learning. Weakness was believed when you were gathering strength. Confusion got projected when you were gaining clarity. Misperceptions of your character gave you room to operate outside surveillance. The wrong person was being watched because who you really were never got known. The costume of confusion you wore served a purpose. It made over-explanation happen. More revelation occurred. Hands got shown more completely. People who think you do not understand tend to explain too much. And in those explanations, exact information gets told about who someone is and how operations work. You collected all that intelligence while playing the role of someone who was not paying attention. You turned condescension into advantage. Every time treatment happened like you could not understand complex things, you used that dismissal as cover to understand everything. Every time speech came at you like you were simple, you simplified your responses while complicating your strategy. You matched external perceptions while contradicting them internally. Dependency was thought to keep you there. And the moment you decided patience was no longer required, you discovered resources, strength, and capabilities. Nobody knew you possessed because you never needed anyone to see your power. You only needed to access it yourself. Your so-called naivety was actually wisdom in disguise. You played dumb to stay safe. You acted confused to avoid conflict. You pretended not to notice to keep peace until you could secure yours permanently. That is not weakness. That is warfare. That is strategy. That is someone who understood that survival sometimes requires playing smaller than you are until full exit becomes possible. The biggest mistake made was being so obsessed with self-image that attention stopped getting paid to you. The need to be center of everything, to be admired, validated, and worshipped created a blind spot. You walked through like it was a wide open door. Mirrors got looked at so much that exit examinations never happened. Through the link in the description or the pinned comment, a coffee, an investment, a signal sent forward, your contribution today is not a donation. It is a receipt. The same documentation instinct that built your exit is operating here, putting weight behind something that activated recognition before you even had language for what you were going through. Someone else is still mid-chapter, still collecting data, still playing it cool, still not sure their inner knowing is reliable. Your investment is how this message finds them before they react instead of respond. As you give, bring with you the three things still in process. The clarity still forming. The support system still being rebuilt. The version of yourself still stepping into freedom. The same precision that timed your exit is working on those three things and on the person your investment is reaching today. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. You realized early that ego was both greatest strength and fatal weakness. Charm and confidence existed that drew people in. But blindness also existed to people already thought captured. Once belief formed that you belonged to someone, real seeing of you stopped happening. You became a prop in a performance rather than a person with agency, and that dismissal was your opportunity. While performances happened for audiences, you studied the performance. You watched how personality shifting happened depending on who was watching. You noticed how public persona contradicted private reality. You tracked inconsistencies between words and actions, and you realized something liberating. None of it was real. It was all theater, and you no longer wanted a role in that production. The narcissism that made superior feelings happen made imagining you would outsmart anyone impossible. So guarding never happened against it. Consideration never existed that you might be steps ahead. Suspicion never arose that documentation was happening. Thoughts never formed that you would have strength or intelligence to plan an unpreventable exit. Arrogance was your invisibility cloak. You played to ego strategically. You complimented when needed. You validated when useful. You maintained just enough admiration to keep satisfaction and distraction high. It was not manipulation. It was survival. You were feeding the beast just enough to keep full attention from turning to your movements. And it worked perfectly. Constant affirmation was needed. That rightness existed. Importance mattered. Specialness was real. Superiority remained unchallenged. That need was exhausting but also predictable. You knew if you provided regular ego maintenance, focus would stay on self instead of scrutinizing you, so you became a supplier while secretly cutting your own supply lines. You did not burn bridges. You let self-ignition happen while you stood at a distance. You did not have to scream, expose, or drag anyone through mud. You knew truth was powerful enough to do what you did not need to. So instead of starting fires, you let lighting happen again and again until ashes became the standing place. You were never the destroyer. You were just the witness who finally stopped holding walls up. There was no dramatic exit, no scorched earth, just a calm, clean break that left everyone wondering how someone so composed could walk away without a trace of malice. That is what hit hardest. You did not come out swinging, you just left. And in doing so, you left behind a silence that spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. That silence made people curious. Questions started getting asked. Not about you, but about the situation you left. You did not have to expose anything. You simply left things alone with the mess that had been kept hidden. Without your energy holding up illusion, truth started leaking through cracks. Lies could not hold up without your presence to soften them. Painted narratives began to unravel the moment you stepped out of the frame. That is what happens when your integrity was the only thing keeping masks in place. You were not interested in revenge. You were interested in peace, and walking away without bitterness was the revenge. Not because it hurt anyone, but because it forced sitting with everything that had been projected onto you. You became the mirror someone tried to avoid, and by the time realization came that damage was not done to you, but by someone else standing in fallout of personal behavior already existed. You walked away holding matches. Yes, but you never struck a flame. Self-ignition did that. So you did not get caught in fire. And now as smoke rises, you were the proof. You played weak long enough to make the exit look accidental. People looked at you and thought you were finished, worn out, emotionally broken, too fragile to survive independently, and you let them think exactly that. But while they observed you through the lens of their ego, you were slipping through cracks they did not know existed. You were not weak. You were wise. You knew that if you made too much noise, they would try harder to trap you. So, you did the opposite. You played invisible. You stopped resisting. Not because you gave in, but because you were conserving energy for the final move. You allowed them to think your surrender was real. But deep down, you were rebuilding in ways they could not see. You were healing in secret. And while they continued laughing, while mockery persisted, while their blindness remained arrogant, you were securing your exit with precision. You did not owe anyone a grand performance. You did not need a dramatic escape. That would have given them reason to call you crazy, emotional, unstable. So instead, you made your exit look like a slow fade, something barely noticeable until you were already gone. That was the brilliance of your strategy. You moved quietly. By the time they noticed you were out of reach, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, and emotionally detached. They tried to re-engage. They tried to provoke. They tried to bait you back into old cycles, but you were already beyond the point of return. You had healed past their access points. They continue trying to figure out when you slipped away. That is the beauty of it. Because the version they thought was broken was actually the version building a new life behind the curtain. You did not just leave, you vanished on purpose. And now all that remains is their confusion and bitter realization that the weakness they saw was the very strategy that freed you. Here is what nobody talks about when they analyze your exit: the emotional discipline it required. You were not operating from a place of numbness or detachment. You felt everything. Every betrayal cut deep. Every lie stung. Every manipulation attempt registered in your nervous system like an alarm bell. But you developed something rare: the ability to feel fully while thinking strategically. Most people cannot hold both states simultaneously. They either shut down emotionally to survive, becoming cold and disconnected, or they stay too emotionally engaged and make reactive decisions that work against them. But you mastered the middle path. You felt the pain without letting it dictate your moves. You acknowledged the hurt without letting it control your strategy. This is advanced level emotional intelligence. You learned to separate your feelings from your actions. When hurtful things were said, you felt the impact. But you did not respond from that wounded place. You waited, you processed. You chose your response based on your long-term goal, not your immediate emotion. That is the difference between reacting and responding. And you became a master at responding. Every conversation became a chess match. You played on multiple levels. Type 333 in the comments. 3 is the number of levels you were operating on simultaneously. Surface strategy, soul, while they could only see 1. 3 threes means all 3 were fully active at once. Let that timestamp live here. On the surface level, you had the conversation they thought you were having. But underneath, you were gathering information. You were testing consistency. You were noting contradictions. You were building your case not for them, but for yourself. You were strengthening your resolve. You were confirming what you already suspected. They thought you were engaged in the argument. You were actually conducting research. They believed you were defending yourself. You were actually documenting their attack patterns. They assumed you were invested in the outcome of the discussion. You were already invested in the outcome of your exit. Everything they said became evidence. Everything they did became data. And you were the scientist observing the experiment with detached fascination. The emotional control this required was extraordinary. You had to suppress your natural instinct to defend yourself, to correct their lies in real time, to point out their hypocrisy, to call them out on their manipulations. But you knew that would derail your larger mission, so you bit your tongue. So you could not fight. You turned your emotional vulnerability into strategic advantage. When they saw you hurt, they felt powerful. That false sense of power made them careless. It made them reveal more than they should have. They got comfortable in their cruelty. They stopped hiding their true nature because they thought you were too broken to do anything about it. But you were collecting every moment, every revelation, every mask slip. All of it went into your mental vault. Marked reasons why leaving is non-negotiable. Type receipt in the comments. One word. Because that is what every moment became logged, filed, archived. Every lie, every pattern, every mask slip. Type it and let the record show you kept yours. The nights you cried alone were not wasted. Those were processing sessions. You were metabolizing the pain, extracting the lessons, and fortifying your determination. Each tear shed in private was you releasing another attachment to the illusion of who they pretended to be. You were mourning not the person in front of you, but the person you thought they were. And that grief had to be honored so you could move forward without looking back. What makes your exit truly legendary is what you sacrificed that nobody talks about. You gave up comfort for freedom. You traded familiarity for authenticity. You exchanged predictable misery for uncertain possibility, and you did it knowing there were no guarantees on the other side. That is courage most people will never understand. You sacrificed the version of yourself that could tolerate disrespect, the part of you that made excuses for bad behavior, the side of you that convinced yourself that love meant enduring pain. You killed those parts of yourself deliberately, and that death was necessary for your rebirth. But it hurt. It hurt to let go of who you had been. Even when who you had been was hurting you, you gave up the fantasy, the dream of who they could become, the hope that they had wake up and see your value, the belief that your love could heal their brokenness. Those fantasies were comfortable, even though they were lies, and releasing them meant facing a harder truth. They were never going to change, and staying meant accepting a life of diminishment. That realization was brutal, but you faced it anyway. You had been playing all these roles without even realizing it. And when you stopped, when you resigned from those positions, there was a void. You had to resist the urge to fill it again, to go back and fix things, to manage their emotions one more time. But you did not. You let them face the consequences of their own behavior without your interference. The social sacrifice was real too. You lost mutual friends who chose sides or chose neutrality. You gave up invitations to events where they would be present. You accepted being misunderstood by people who only heard one version. And you made peace with the fact that some people would never know your truth. That takes tremendous strength. You sacrificed immediate comfort for long-term peace. Those first nights alone were hard. Those moments when you wanted to reach out and almost did. Those times when loneliness felt overwhelming and going back seemed easier than moving forward. You sat with all of that discomfort. You did not run from it. You did not numb it. You did not medicate it with new relationships or distractions. You faced it head-on and let it transform you. What most people do not understand is that your exit cost you everything in the short term to gain everything in the long term. You were willing to pay that price. You understood that freedom is not free. Peace requires sacrifice. Growth demands discomfort, and you were ready to pay whatever it costs to reclaim yourself. Share this message with someone still in the middle of the chapter you just closed. Not to give advice, to send a signal that the exit is possible, that the sacrifice is worth it, that the clarity comes. They may not be ready to hear it yet. Send it anyway. The right message finds people at the right moment. You know who needs this. Let us talk about something that haunts them more than anything else: the precision of your timing. You did not leave too early when they could have convinced you that you were overreacting. You did not leave too late when you would have been too damaged to recover quickly. You left at the exact moment when you had maximum clarity and minimum dependency. That timing was not random. It was calculated. You waited until you had your resources secured. Financial independence was locked down. Your emotional support system was activated. Physical space was arranged. Mental clarity was achieved. You were not leaving until all your pieces were in position. This was not impulsive. This was methodical. You were building a foundation strong enough to catch you when you jumped. They never noticed you were preparing because you hid your preparation in plain sight. When you started that new interest or hobby, they thought you were just keeping busy. You were actually building a new identity separate from them. When you reconnected with old friends, they thought you were just being social. You were actually rebuilding your support network they had helped you neglect. When you started working on yourself, going to therapy, reading books about growth, They thought you were trying to fix the relationship. You were actually fixing yourself for the exit. Every move looked innocent in isolation. But together, they formed an escape plan so thorough that by the time you activated it, failure was impossible. The timing of your final exit was equally precise. You did not leave during a major argument when emotions were high, and you might have been convinced to stay. You did not leave during a good period when they could point to recent positive moments. You left during a moment of crystal clarity, when the pattern was undeniable, when their behavior had been consistent enough that you could not lie to yourself anymore. You waited for them to show you exactly who they were one more time. And when they did, when they proved beyond any doubt that change was never coming, you activated your exit sequence, swift, clean, absolute, no room for negotiation because you had already done all the negotiating with yourself internally. You had already heard every argument for staying and found them all insufficient. That same instinct, knowing exactly when the moment is right, is operating now. Through the link in the description or the pinned comment, your investment today lands at the precise window when activation just happened and the signal is still warm. Someone else is still mid-process, still building their foundation, still not sure when the right moment is to move. Your contribution is how this message reaches them before they act from emotion instead of strategy. Bring with you the 3 things you moved on with precision, the resource you secured before exiting, the connection you rebuilt before they could isolate you, the version of yourself you prepared in silence. Place all 3 inside what you send forward. The same calculated timing that freed you is working on those 3 things, and on the person your investment is reaching. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. Beneath all the strategy, all the planning, all the performance, there was something they could never touch, your inner knowing, that quiet voice that whispered truth when everything around you was screaming lies, that intuition that recognized dysfunction even when you could not articulate it yet. That knowing saved you, and protecting it was your top priority. They tried to silence that knowing through gaslighting. They attempted to convince you that your perception was wrong. Through manipulation, they tried to make you doubt your judgment. Through confusion, they sought to disconnect you from your internal guidance system. But something in you refused to completely let go of that inner voice. Even when you questioned it, even when you ignored it temporarily, you never fully abandoned it. Type "still standing" in the comments. After all the gaslighting, after all the attempts to disconnect you from what you knew, after everything that tried to rewrite your reality, still standing. Let that be your declaration. That knowing is what prompted you to start documenting patterns. When things happened that felt wrong, but you could not explain why, your inner knowing told you to remember, to keep mental notes, to trust that the pieces would form a picture eventually. And they did. Your intuition was building a case long before your conscious mind was ready to see it. The knowing is what made you start testing them. Subconsciously, you began creating situations to see how they would respond, not as manipulation, but as verification. Your soul was trying to gather evidence to convince your heart of what it already understood, and every test they failed was another brick in the wall of certainty you were building. You protected this knowing by limiting how much you let them gaslight you. You stopped arguing about reality. When they tried to rewrite history, you did not fight to correct it anymore. You just noted the attempt and filed it away. When they contradicted themselves, you did not point it out. You just observed. Your knowing did not need their validation. It was self-validating. And that autonomy was your secret weapon. The inner knowing is what gave you peace about your decision, even when the exit was terrifying. You knew at a soul level that staying was death. Maybe not physical death, but spiritual death, emotional death, the death of your authentic self, and your knowing chose life, even when life looked uncertain and scary. That instinct for self-preservation at the deepest level is what pulled you through. They could not understand how you became so certain, how you went from trying to make it work to being absolutely done. They did not realize that your inner knowing had been building that certainty incrementally the whole time. Every boundary violation added to it. Every lie deposited into it. Every manipulation contributed to it, until one day the knowing reached critical mass and your conscious mind finally caught up with what your soul had known all along. Your exit deserves an Oscar, because what you did required you to act against every natural instinct. Every part of you wanted to explode, to expose, to make sure everyone knew exactly what happened. But you understood something profound. The most devastating move you could make was to give them nothing. No reaction, no drama, no ammunition. Just a clean, absolute final disappearance that left nothing but questions and their own reflection. You are living proof that elevation does not require explanation. You escaped without vengeance, without theatrics, and without losing the core of who you are. That is power. That is rare. You are living proof. That phrase matters because someone else still is not sure their experience was real. Still is not sure their perception can be trusted. Still is not sure the exit is possible without losing themselves in the process. Through the link in the description or the pinned comment or coffee, whatever is in your hand right now, your contribution today is living proof forwarded, not testimony evidence. The same quiet power you used to exit without vengeance is what makes this contribution meaningful. No drama, no fanfare. Just a clean signal sent in the direction of someone who needs it. As you give, bring with you the three things your exit protected. The core of who you are that never got touched. The peace that no one can take credit for. The direction that belongs entirely to you. Place them inside what you send forward. What you protected in silence is now multiplied by every person your investment reaches. The link is in the description and the pinned comment, and that is why they are still spinning in confusion, because no one taught them that the most graceful exits leave the loudest echoes. So let the gossip happen. Let the story get rewritten. Let the villain painting continue. History will show what really happened, not through anyone's words, but through your transformation. The glow you carry now, the peace that radiates from you, the purpose that drives you forward, the power that no longer needs validation from anyone. You are not who you were when it all started. And thank God for that, because who you are now is unshakable, undeniable, and completely unavailable to dysfunction. If you are not yet subscribed, do that now. Not as a follow, as a decision to stay in the frequency of people who operate at this level, who feel everything and react to nothing, who exit without explanation, who turn pain into precision. The next message in this frequency is already forming. Subscribe and stay in signal. Chosen one. Your exit was not just a choice. It was your evolution in motion. And you walked out of that fire, not just whole, but holy. You perfectly planned and executed your exit from a situation that tried to consume you. And you deserve every standing ovation, every accolade, every recognition for this legendary performance. Because what you pulled off was not just smart. It was masterful. It was not just brave. It was brilliant. And it will echo through eternity as proof that silent power is the most dangerous power of all.